We begin the program on the picket line.
What's the mood this morning, my friends? Yeah! The mood is that PSAC members are fired up and are ready to fight for the contract and the wages that they deserve.
There are more than 250 picket locations across the country. Most are right here in the capital on the federal government's doorstep. Elsewhere, public servants are set up outside government offices, passport centers, or even at border crossings. There are two main issues in these talks: money and the ability to work from home. Workers say they can't keep up with costs and they want more flexibility with telework. A lot of services are affected. Here are some of the main ways how. First, your income tax return could be delayed. You could also be delayed crossing the border, both by vehicle and by air. Your passport, immigration, or EI application could also be delayed. And if you're a veteran, your application for a new payment could be delayed. To hear the government side of negotiations, Mona Fortier is the president of the Treasury Board. Minister Fortier, I'd like to start, if I could, with the status of negotiations right now. You're still talking. How would you describe the tone of the conversations between the government and the Public Service Alliance of Canada?
Well, good afternoon, David, and thank you for having me. Well, we're continuing conversations at the table and making sure that we're focusing on how we're going to best get to a deal.
But we're on strike, right? We have a strike happening right now in the country. So I wonder, is that a result of negotiations being intractable and a deal being very far out of reach, or is it because the clock ran down on the strike deadline that the union set?
Well, the union set the clock, and it did start till last night. They announced they were going on strike, and the good news is that we're still at the table, and that's what I'm focusing on, finding those solutions to get to a competitive, of course, fair deal for wages and other benefits for workers, and then, of course, that are reasonable to Canadians.
Okay, you said at your news conference earlier today that the union needs to compromise. Does that mean your 9% wage increase offer is the final offer from government on salary? You're not willing to compromise on that any further?
What I'll say is that we have brought the offer to the recommendation that was provided by the Public Interest Commission at 9%, and we believe that is a fair offer.
Right, but does that mean that's your final offer? Because if your position now is that the union needs to compromise, should we interpret that to mean that you're not willing to give a raise in excess of 9% over 3 years?
Well, I will say that's where negotiations are taking part, and of course, if I could share what's happening at the table, it would mean I'd be negotiating in public, which I will not, and I will respect the conversations that are happening at the table.
Okay, but you also said today, Minister, that you don't want to give the union a blank check. They're not asking for a blank check. They're asking for 13.5% over 3 years. Why is that salary request too high?
So there are other non-monetary and monetary issues that they're bringing to the table. Wages are one thing, and that's why I'm saying it has to be reasonable for Canadians and making sure it's not a blank check that we're writing.
So the wage percentage is not the primary issue in terms of compensation and costs. It's other ancillary issues that are more of a concern for you. I mean, walk me through what that means.
So there are many issues. Wages, of course, is one of them, and there are many numbers that came out, as I said. And maybe I want to go back to the fact that we started negotiations a year ago, and PSAC walked out the table and then came back for mediation during the last 2 weeks, and we're continuing, of course, and this is where we're at this time for wages, which is a very important part of the negotiations, but there are other issues that are, of course, being discussed, and those are going to have to get to some compromise and some approach where we get to a deal.
When Chris Aylward was on the show earlier this week, he said that they had compromised a little bit on their salary request. So has PSAC come down from the 4.5% a year over 3 years that they started with? As you moved up to 9, did they move down from 13.5, or are they holding at that upper level?
Again, with all due respect, David, I'd love to have that conversation with you, but I can't, as this is a negotiation at the table, and I cannot start negotiating in public.
Okay, well, I'm going to try again. I may get the same answer, but it's on a different topic, because I know that remote work is a significant issue in these talks. Are you willing to do a deal on remote work that puts the right to remote work into the collective agreement, or are you insisting on saying as a policy that management can control?
Telework is a management right. We've been looking at how we've been transforming from work by necessity from home during COVID to a hybrid model that gives the opportunity for public servants to work from home 2 to 3 days a week. We also look at what's happening in other jurisdictions, the private sector, and we're offering, I believe, a way to deliver services to Canadians, including hybrid work, and that is what we will continue to work on, making sure we deliver the best services to Canadians.
But if you're not opposed to the model and you're willing to offer it to the employees in the public sector, what's the downside from your perspective on putting it into the collective agreement as opposed to keeping it as a management right operating policy?
Again, my position, it's a management right. We're looking at how we can, of course, look at how telework can best be used or hybrid work can best be used to deliver services to Canadians, looking at, as I said earlier, what other jurisdictions are doing and the private sector, and we will continue to look at how we will transform the future of work, and telework is part of it.
So do I interpret that you see it as a management right? So putting it into the collective agreement will be seen as a concession, you'd lose control of it, and that's why you're not willing to do it? Is that the general idea?
Well, we can continue discussing this, of course. My important point right now is that I believe it's management right, as I said earlier, and we have to look at ways to make sure that it doesn't erode that management right.
Okay, so I'm not wrong. I'm trying to figure out how to define it correctly. You see it as a concession, giving it up as a management right? Yes?
Again, there are other ways maybe to look, and there are things being discussed at the table that I can't share at this time, but we do have two things that are common. First of all, we want public servants to be able to have the tools necessary, the capacity of delivering those services, and for Canadians to have best services, and we're putting that together to find the right path forward.
Okay, you talk about Canadians having best services, and we heard some pretty stark warnings from your cabinet colleagues today about what happens to some of those services the longer this strike goes on, in terms of passport backlogs, immigration backlogs, complications at the Canada Revenue Agency. How long are you willing to let this go before the government has to consider some sort of back-to-work legislation?
Well, first of all, as I said, the good news is we are at the table. That's what we're focusing our efforts on. Essential services have been defined prior to the deal with PSAC. As we know, the essential services like AI, veterans income support, Canada Child Benefit will continue to be delivered. There are other services that are not deemed essential, whereas there will be disruptions. It won't be business as usual, but we are going to try to support Canadians as best as we can. And again, I have to say we respect workers' rights. Therefore, we're going to have to balance the fact that it will be not business as usual for now.
But you know, one of the issues that could be affecting our passports, and you look at the challenges that we've had with passport processing and passport applications over the last couple of years in this country, I can't imagine there's an enormous appetite for Canadians to see more trouble in that particular area. So, Minister, surely there is a tipping point where you have to look at some sort of legislative action if you can't get a negotiated settlement, is there not?
Well, right now I have to say Minister Gould shared during the press conference this afternoon that we have been working very hard with passports, and for now, of course, they're not deemed essential, but if we can get back to the table, get to a deal, and have this strike be less long than it could be, it would be helpful so we could get back to delivering passports for Canadians, and we feel for Canadians, but we also have to respect workers' rights.
You just say get back to the table. I just want to make sure.
Sorry,
I don't there's still talks are still happening.
Okay. The talks are happening. Yes.
Okay. So how optimistic are you right now that I know you can't get into the specific differences that exist on proposals and stuff. How optimistic are you right now that you can have a quick resolution to this, something that just limits the strike to a day or a couple of days?
Well, I am convinced that we have all the ingredients to have the conversation that will lead to a deal that is reasonable for Canadians and especially competitive and fair for public servants. That's my focus, and I really encourage that we will get to a deal as soon as we can.
Okay, President of the Treasury Board, Mona Fortier, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for taking this time with me.
Okay, now for the other side of this negotiation. Chris Aylward is the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. He's here in the studio. Mr. Aylward, good to see you again.
Great to be here, David.
I wonder what's your reaction to what Mona Fortier had to say there?
Well, one of the things that I picked up on what the minister said was that, they're arguing that they don't want to put remote work in the collective agreement because it's a managerial right. Mm-hmm. Pretty much everything in the collective agreement is a managerial right. For example, hours of work, right? Managers have the right to tell you what hours you should work. That's in the collective agreement. If I'm told by my manager, you can't work the hours that you want or that you're seeking, I file a grievance. If the the intention of the collective agreement has been applied, I'm not going to win my grievance. That's a managerial right as well. So I disagree with the minister that they can't put it in the collective agreement because it's a managerial right.
But they seem to be willing to give you a remote work arrangement, or your members remote work arrangements, but just not put it into the CBA. So is there a way to do this through side letters, through memorandums of understandings? Are there other ways around this impasse to get your members the flexibility they want, but bring the strike to an early conclusion?
Look, we're willing to look at anything, basically, to make sure that our members' rights are protected, though. And that's the thing. That's the issue for us. It's fine to say that they're prepared to give us something. If it's not in the collective agreement, what happens to that in 3 months, 6 months, a year from now? Those rights are gone, So, again, that's why we're asking for it to be put in the collective agreement to make sure. Again, number one, everybody knows what the game rules are. Mm-hmm. It's applied fairly and consistently, and we have recourse rights.
You're on strike, so obviously negotiations didn't go as well as you had hoped. But give me your sense of the tone of the talks right now. Like, it doesn't seem to me anyone's flipping tables and that talks are pointless. I mean, how would you describe the situation internally and the possibility of getting to a deal quickly?
As the minister said, we are still at the table. We're going to continue to talk. If there's a willingness on the employer side, we'll continue through this weekend. We'll stay there for as long as it takes to get to a deal, because that's our goal, is to get to a deal. We didn't want to start this strike at all. Our goal from June of 2021, going on 2 years, we've been in bargaining, almost 2 years. Mm-hmm. Again, it's like we just need to get to a deal. For those first few months, I mean, there was absolutely nothing happening. When we announced the strike votes in January, all of a sudden the talk started going. But I mean, as I said, we're still at the table, we're still talking, we're still trying to get to a deal that satisfies both sides.
So when you made the decision at 9 o'clock last night, or 9:15 when you had the press conference, was that because progress wasn't being made at all, or just because you'd hit that deadline and you didn't have the critical mass to get a tentative agreement? Was it the clock ran out rather than you weren't making progress?
No, I mean, we were making some progress, but we could see, like, we're just not close enough to a deal to say, okay, maybe we'll just stay at the table. And once we announced the deadline of 9 p.m. Last night, we stuck with it. We weren't going to change that. We put it out to the membership that you may be on strike Wednesday morning, depending on what this government chooses to do.
So on wages, we've seen the new number of 9% over 3 years from the government came out today. You had initially, your opening proposal, I believe, was 13.5, right? 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. Right. Have you come down a bit from that? Because the other day you suggested there's been some movement on your side, on their side. We've seen their movement. Have you moved down from your high number that you started with? We
have. There's been some compromise on both sides. But, we still got some room to make up, and that's why we're staying at the table.
So it's not a 4.5% gap. It's slightly smaller than that. I'm guessing you won't tell me exactly how big that gap will be.
Compromises have been made on both sides.
All right, so I wonder about this. We saw the ministers out today, and they laid out the impact this is going to have on services. And there's about 40,000 essential workers who will keep doing important stuff. But a lot of key things like passports and immigration applications, those are going to start to pile up the longer this goes on. Given everything, the challenges in those departments over the past while, are you worried about public opinion turning against you and your members if this goes on too long?
We're asking the public to be patient. Yes, we're on strike. Yes, there'll be slowdowns of program deliveries and that. We're asking the public to be patient. Workers are fed up. For the same period that we're in negotiations for, the inflation rate is 13.8%. Or 14.8%, sorry, or 13.8.
Yeah, there's a lot of numbers in negotiations.
There is, you're absolutely right. So, again, we said we want to make sure that we're staying somewhat in line with the rate of inflation. Workers can't continue to have, their wages repressed and repressed and repressed. And when the federal government, the largest employer in the country, represses its wages for its own employees, what in fact they're doing is repressing wages for workers right across the country, whether they're unionized, non-unionized, public sector, or private sector. And that has to stop. When workers in this country are sitting back and watching corporations make, record profits, we're getting gouged every time we turn around, we're being gouged. But yet nobody wants to pay workers. No, just keep the wages down. We're asking the government to come to the table to set that bar for all workers in this country, so that no worker is actually left behind. Workers can't wait any longer to receive a decent and fair pay increase.
But there were questions asked today. You might have people getting ready to take that summer vacation, maybe the first one since the pandemic. They're waiting on their passports, or they need to get passports. They might not get them because of all of this if it goes on too long. I mean, what's your message to Canadians who may lose out on things while this is happening?
Well, in the issue of the passports, if somebody is traveling next week and they need a passport, that service is still available. The emergency passport is still available, and they'll get their passport. If you're not traveling next week, again, we're just asking Canadians to be patient. We're at the table. We're trying to get to a deal. That's our goal here. But again, we want to make sure that this government understands that this is about working people in this country. And again, workers can't take another hit of a rollback, of a wage rollback, and that's what this government is basically asking.
The government doesn't want to touch the issue of back-to-work legislation. They've made that pretty clear. The New Democrats have said they wouldn't support it, and it seems, based on your description of the nature of the talks and the government's description of the nature of the talks, that may not be necessary. Do you think the way things are right now in your discussions that this could be a short strike, a medium strike? I mean, what's your sense of how long this could go on for?
We're hoping for a short strike. As I said, we want to get to a deal, but again, we need to start making some progress at the table on all of the issues. As the minister said, there's other issues at the table that we've made very little progress on. We haven't seen anything tabled by the employer. So again, we need to make progress, and the only way to do that, of course, is to stay at the table.
Sorry, has any progress been made since the strike started, or since you announced last night you were going to? Has there been any movement from management at all today?
There's been some. Again, we continue to talk. We continue to discuss the discussions, and we're hopeful that we're going to be able to get to a deal.
Okay, Chris Aylward, thanks for your time. The voice is, even using the bullhorn, talking to the members on the picket line. Thank you so much. That's the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Chris Aylward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.